I'm going to show you how to make REST API calls to Aria Automation. Let's get started.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Watrous from VVork. If this is your first time here and you want to learn about automating, programming, and monitoring in VMware environments, you're in the right place. Start now by subscribing and click the bell so that you don't miss a thing.
This is part 9 in a 10-part video series in which we're exploring how to make REST API calls. In parts 1 through 8, we took a generic look at how to make REST API calls. But now, in parts 9 and onwards, we're going to take a look at specific VMware products. In part 9, we're going to be taking a look at how to make REST API calls to VMware Aria Automation. Alright, you'll recall we ended the last video, part 9a, talking about the API version or versions that your Aria Automation server supports. Now, one thing I did not tell you is that you do not have to specify an API version in your URLs. If you want to, you can leave this part out. So for example, instead of going to the params tab and defining that value, you can say, I don't want that API stated explicitly. You can just leave it blank. But if you do so, your REST client is going to always use the latest version of the REST API, which might be what you want. On the other hand, if you're trying to maintain backwards compatibility, make certain that you are passing in the API version that you want us to use. In this video, what we're going to be talking about is how to authenticate to your VMware Automation server or Aria Automation or whatever yours happens to be called. The two operations that we called in the previous video do not require authentication. There's a small handful of REST operations defined by the API that do not require authentication. But the vast majority of the operations that you're going to want to call, you have to be authenticated. So what we're going to do is take a look at these two requests. It's a two-step process to authenticate. We're going to take a look at this two-step process that's going to show how to authenticate to an on-prem Aria Automation server. It's a little bit different for a cloud version of Aria Automation, but if you understand how to do this here, you'll understand how to do this for Aria Automation Cloud. All right, so taking a look at the first operation, the first request, which is called get API token. In order to authenticate, you need to get an API token, sometimes called a refresh token. With the on-prem version of Aria Automation, you do that by making this programmatic call. On the other hand, for Aria Automation Cloud, you go into the Aria Automation Cloud interface, and in that interface, they will generate an API token for you. But let's leave the cloud version out of the discussion for the moment. For on-prem Aria Automation, you need to call this request. So what this request is doing is it's doing a post. So whereas previously we were doing gets, now we are explicitly doing a post to create a new API token. So post, hey, VRA server, I want a new token, is essentially what this URL endpoint is doing. Now you'll notice at the tail end of this URL, we've got our version, API version that we're selecting. Again, that part's optional, but you must use this endpoint. So CSP, what is that, Cloud Services Platform, /gateway /am /API /login is going to return the API token that we need for the next step. You must also pass in this query parameter access_token. You don't have to set a value, but you do have to pass in access token. It's a query parameter. It's showing up right here. All right, let's go ahead and hit send. And as you can see, we've gotten back a refresh token. Now, refresh token and API token mean the same thing in this context. So we've got the API token that we need for step number 2. Now, to make step number 2 easier, what I've done is on the test tab, the post request scripts tab, I have taken that refresh token and shoved it into my variable called API_token. So API_token is going to get set when we run this request, and it's going to put this value into this variable. In fact, we can go double check that. If we go to our VVork environment, you'll notice that API token now has the refresh token. Again, we need that piece of information for our next step. So go back to our collections and let's look at our next REST request. This REST request is called get access token. Ultimately, the access token is what we need for all the subsequent REST requests that we're going to be making here. So the access token is acquired by calling a similar URL, but notice the URL this time is IIS API login. And again, you can optionally pass in the API version. When we run this request, again, always double check that we got back a 200 code, we get back something called a token. That is the access token that we're striving to get. And as you may have already guessed, since this token, this whole token is going to be necessary in all of our subsequent REST calls. So once again, I created a post request script here in the test tab that's taking the token, that's the access token that got returned, and it's sticking it into my variable called access token. Again, if we go to my VVork environment, you can see that access token now has the token that we need for all of our subsequent REST requests. You're probably asking yourself right now, why do I need two types of tokens? Well, the short answer to that is, this is just the way it works. Get used to it. The longer answer is, don't quote me on these numbers, this is my recollection. If I recall correctly, the access token is good for up to 25 minutes of inactivity. If you go idle for more than 25 minutes, the access token is going to expire. That's a security measure to make certain that you don't leave open connections forever and ever and ever. If your access token expires, you could go back and go through both of these requests again, but to make it quick and simple, the API token that we got from this request is good for 90 days. So you don't need to generate another API token. You can just simply call get access token again. Now, again, from here on out, the access token is what we're going to need in all the subsequent requests that we're going to make. So I'm just taking a look at one real quickly here. If we go to the organization ID REST request that I've defined and we just select one of them, you'll notice that, well, this is not the access key and this is not the access key. Where the heck is the access key? I don't see the access key. Well, maybe it's here under authorization. Well, no, I don't see it there. Or maybe it's under headers. No, I don't see it there. In reality, we could have implemented it. How you pass in the access token could have been implemented a lot of different ways. But the way we've done it is the access token ultimately needs to be passed in by passing in a header. So by saying authorization bearer space, and then I need to go get that whole token here. Oh, this is so inconvenient. Let me see. Maybe I can copy this here. No, I can't. Oh my gosh. There's an easier way of doing what I'm doing here. Instead of coming here and pasting in that access token, this is ultimately what we need. We need an authorization header with the value of bearer space followed by the access token. But you don't want to have to keep pasting this in everywhere. Well, you could certainly change this. You could say bearer access token in each of your requests. But again, there's got to be an easier way of doing this. In fact, there is. So while you could do it this way, the way we're going to do this is we are going to store the authorization information at a higher level. Instead of storing the authorization header in this request and all the other requests, we could store the authorization information in this folder, but we'd have to do that for all these other folders. So instead of setting the authorization information there, we're going to set the authorization information up at the collection level. In fact, I've already done that. If you've downloaded my collection, You may have noticed when you go to the collection and go to its authorization tab that it has been set up to do bearer token, passing in the access token. Again, the ultimate result of setting this up is any REST requests that inherit these settings are in effect going to have a header called authorization set to the value bearer, followed by a space, followed by that access token. So taking a look here again at this request, we don't need to say anything in this request about the authorization information because I've set up this request and all the subsequent requests to inherit their authorization settings from their parent. So here's his parent. In turn, this folder's authorization settings are inheriting from its parent, which is the collection. So again, there's lots of different ways you can do this, but in general, in working with the VRA API, I like to have my get access token REST request, get the value, stick that value in a variable, and then use that variable to set up authorization at the collection level. I have explained briefly how to do authorization in VRA's API. In the previous video, part 9a, I pointed you to some supplemental documentation that you can go to learn more about the process of doing authentication. In particular, if you are using Aria Automation Cloud, again, you will not need to call getAPI-token. Instead, you'll log into Aria Automation Cloud. You'll request that they generate a API token for you, and then you will skip straight to get access token. How to do that is talked about in detail in the documentation that I alluded to in part 9a. So if you're an Aria Automation Cloud customer, make certain that you go back and check through the URLs. Specifically, at those URLs, look at the documentation about VRA Cloud authorization. All right, so that's going to wrap it up. You now know how to do authorization. Now we've opened up a world of possibilities of things we can do, which we're going to be doing in the next part and the following parts of this video series. Join me in the next video and we'll continue looking at the Aria Automation API.